Guruvin ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Untitled Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jai Gur Premanande. Still reading from Prabhupada Leela at the moment. Will we find something else? Huh? Yeah, that's right, we're just about finished. So reading first of all from Srila Prabhupada Leela Uniting Two Worlds. This is volume 6 of the 6th volume Leela series. And we're on the final chapter, which is called the final lesson. Prabhupada also continued speaking, as he had in recent months, about being unafraid of death and being fixed in transcendental knowledge. When receiving a presentation of some of his books recently printed in Portuguese by Hridayananda Goswami, Prabhupada encouraged him and said, "This is life, the material world is just bones. The bones are not our real life. Our real concern is the living force. The bones may remain or go, it doesn't matter. The real life is sustaining. The real life is, it doesn't matter. The real life is sustaining the bones." Yeah, there is even a history that there was a rishi who had only bones. So there's a science by which you can sustain life by only bones. Hiranyakashipu did it. "You are also doing it," Srila Prabhupada Tamal Krishna said. "So take care of the bones as long as possible," said Prabhupada, "but the real life is here. Always remember that the material world means we are simply all protecting bones and flesh together, but they have no knowledge of what they are." And when Atreya Rishi visited Srila Prabhupada and asked that he visit Tehran, Prabhupada said that he was ready to go, but now you have to take a bundle of bones. These were, of course, the same themes that Prabhupada had always taught, the same themes that were in his books, but the lessons were more poignant and striking when Prabhupada applied them to his own situation. So Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 1. This chapter is entitled The History of the Life of Ajamil. So if you haven't heard this story before, then it's a real eye-opener for you. So we shall just read the summary, which is given, and then we'll do the verse. Throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, there are descriptions of 10 subject matters, including creation, subsequent creation, and the planetary systems. Sukadeva Goswami, the speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam, has already described creation, subsequent creation, and the planetary system in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th cantos. Now, in this 6th canto, which consists of 19 chapters, he will describe Poshana, or protection by the Lord. The first chapter relates the history of Ajamil, who was considered a greatly sinful man, but was liberated when 4 order carriers of Vishnu came to rescue him from the hands of the order carriers of Yamaraj. A full description of how he was liberated, having been relieved of the reactions of his sinful life, is given in this chapter. Sinful activities are painful both in this life and in the next. We should know for certain that the cause of all painful life is sinful action. On the path of fruit of work, one certainly commits sinful activities, and therefore, according to the considerations of Karma Kanda, different types of atonement are recommended. Such methods of atonement, however, do not free one from ignorance, which is the root of sinful life. Consequently, one is prone to commit sinful activities even after atonement, which is therefore very inadequate for purification. On the path of speculative knowledge, one becomes free from sinful life by understanding things as they are. Therefore, the acquirement of speculative knowledge is also considered a method of atonement. Where performing fruitive activities, one can become free from the actions of sinful life through austerity, penance, celibacy, control of the mind and senses, truthfulness, and the practice of mystic yoga. By awakening knowledge, one may also neutralize sinful reactions. Neither of these methods, however, can free one from the tendency to commit sinful activities. By Bhakti Yoga, one can completely avoid the tendency for sinful life. Other methods are not very feasible. Therefore, the Vedic literature concludes that devotional service is more important than the methods of Karmakanda and Jnanakanda. Only the path of devotional service is auspicious for everyone. Fruitive activities and speculative knowledge cannot independently liberate anyone, but devotional service, independent of karma and jnana, is so potent that one who has fixed his mind at the lotus feet of Krishna is guaranteed not to meet the Yamadutas, the order carriers of Yamaraj, even in dreams. To prove the strength of devotional service, Shukadeva Goswami described the history of Ajamil. Ajamil was a resident of Kanyakubja, the modern Kanauj. He was trained by his parents to become a perfect Brahmin by studying the Vedas and following the regulative principles. But because in his past the youthful Brahmin was somehow attracted by a prostitute, and because of her association, he became most fallen and abandoned all regulative principles. Ajamil begot in the womb of the prostitute 10 sons, the last of whom he called Narayan. At the time of Ajamil's death, when the order carriers of Yamaraj came to take him, he loudly called the name Narayan in fear because he was attached to his youngest son. Thus he remembered the original Narayan, Lord Vishnu. Although he did not chant the holy name Narayan completely offenselessly, it acted nevertheless. As soon as he chanted the holy name of Narayan, the order carriers of Lord Vishnu immediately appeared on the scene. A discussion ensued between the order carriers of Lord Vishnu and those of Yamaraj, and by hearing that discussion, Ajamil was liberated. He could then understand the bad effect of fruitive activities and could also understand how exalted is the process of devotional service. So, a very good lesson here. Okay, we'll do this text one then. Shri Parikshadavacha Nivritti Marga Katita Nivritti Marga Katita Ado Bhagavata Yata Ado Bhagavata Yata Krama Yoga Palabdena Krama Yoga Palabdena Brahmana Yad Samshruti Brahmana Yad Samshruti Shri Parikshadavacha Nivritti Marga Katita Ado Bhagavata Yata Krama Yoga Palabdena Brahmana Yada Samshruti Shri Parikshadavacha Nivritti Marga Katita Ado Bhagavata Yata Krama Yoga Palabdena Brahmana Yada Samshruti. Let's chant.
Nivritti Magakantika Ado Bhagavatayata Kramayog Palavdena Ramanaya Dasanshvita
Viparikshituvacha Nivritti Marga Katita Ado Bhagavatayata Rama Yogopalabdena Ramanaya Samskriti Viparikshituvacha Nivritti Marga Katita Ado Bhagavatayata Rama Yoga Palavdena Brahmana Brahmana Samsiti.
Mataji's. Shri Parikshitavacha. Maharaj Parikshit said, Nivritti Marga, the path of liberation, Katita, described, Ado, in the beginning, Bhagavata, by your holiness, Yata, Julie, Krama, gradually, Yoga Upalabdena, obtained by the yoga process, Brahmana, along with Lord Brahma, after reaching Brahmaloka, Yat, by which way, Samshuti, cessation of the repetition of birth and death. Translation. Maharaj Parikshit said, O my Lord, O Sukadeva Goswami, you have already described in the second canto the path of liberation, Nivritti Marga. By following that path, one is certainly elevated gradually to the highest planetary system, Brahmaloka, from which one is promoted to the spiritual world along with Lord Brahma. Thus, one's repetition of birth and death in the material world ceases. Please repeat. Maharaj Parikshit said, O my Lord, O Sukadeva Goswami, you have already described in the second canto the path of liberation, Nivritti Marg. By following that path, one is certainly elevated gradually to the highest planetary system, Brahmaloka, from which one is promoted to the spiritual world, along with Lord Brahma. Thus, one's repetition of birth and death in the material world ceases. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Since Maharaj Parikshit was a Vaishnava, when he heard the description at the end of the fifth canto of the different hellish conditions of life, he was very much concerned with how to liberate the conditioned souls from the clutches of Maya and take them back home, back to Godhead. Therefore, he reminded the spiritual master Sukadeva Goswami about the Nivritti Marg, or path of liberation, which he had described in the second canto. Maharaj Parikshit, who at the time of death was fortunate to have met Sukadeva Goswami, inquired from Sukadeva Goswami about the path of liberation at that crucial time. Sukadeva Goswami very much appreciated his question and congratulated him by saying, Varyan Eshate Prashna Krito Loka Hitam Nripa Atmavit Samataprim Sam Shrotavyadishu Yapara. My dear king, your question is glorious because it is very beneficial for all kinds of people. The answer to this question is the prime subject matter for hearing, and it is approved by all transcendentalists. Bhagavatam 2.1.1. Parikshit Maharaj was astonished that the living entities in the conditional stage do not accept the path of liberation, devotional service, instead of suffering in so many hellish conditions. This is a symptom of Vaishnava Vanchakalpatarubhas Cha, Kripasandubhya Eva Cha. Vaishnava is an ocean of mercy. Kripasandubhya, that's the word. Paradukha Dukhi, he is unhappy because of the unhappiness of others. Therefore, Parikshit Maharaj, being compassionate toward the conditioned souls suffering in hellish life, suggested that Sukadeva Goswami continue describing the path of liberation, which he had explained in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam. The word Samshruti is very important in this connection. Samshruti refers to continuing on the path of birth and death. Asamshruti, on the contrary, refers to Nivritti Marg, or the path of liberation, by which one's birth and death cease, and one gradually progresses to Brahmaloka. Unless one is a pure devotee who does not care about going to the higher planetary systems, in which case one immediately turns home back to Godhead by executing devotional service. Tyakta Punarjan Man Naiti. Parikshit Maharaj therefore was very eager to hear from Shukadeva Goswami about the path of liberation for the conditioned soul. According to the opinion of the Acharyas, the word Karma Yoga Palabdena indicates that by first performing Karma Yoga and then Jnana Yoga and finally coming to the platform of Bhakti Yoga, one can be liberated. Bhakti Yoga, however, is so powerful that it does not depend on Karma Yoga or Jnana Yoga. Bhakti Yoga itself is so powerful that even an impious man with no assets in Karma Yoga or an illiterate with no assets in Jnana Yoga can undoubtedly be elevated to the spiritual world if he simply adheres to Bhakti Yoga. Mam Evaishya Samshaya, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 8:7, that by the process of Bhakti Yoga, one undoubtedly goes back to Godhead, back home to the spiritual world. Yogis, however, instead of going directly to the spiritual world, sometimes want to see other planetary systems, and therefore they ascend to the higher planetary system where Lord Brahma lives, as indicated here by the word Brahmana at the time of dissolution. Lord Brahma, along with all the inhabitants of Brahmaloka, goes directly to the spiritual world. This is confirmed in the Vedas as follows. Brahmana Saha Tisarve Samprapte Prati Sanchare Parashanti Kritatmana Pravishanti Parampadam. Because of their exalted position, those who are on Brahmaloka at the time of dissolution go directly back home, back to Godhead, along with Lord Brahma. Om Ganatmarandashya Gananjana Salakaya Chakram Litamyana Dasma Shri Namaha Kam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Lagate Grim Yatki Patamam Vande Shikrim Dirataranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadikora Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Translation again. Maharaj Parikshit said, O my Lord, O Sukadeva Goswami, you have already described in the second canto the path of liberation, Nivriti Marg. By following that path, one is certainly elevated gradually to the highest planetary system, Brahmaloka, from which one is promoted to the spiritual world along with Lord Brahma. Thus one's repetition of birth and death in the material world ceases. It's interesting that first point being made here is that Maharaj Parikshit, who is a Vaishnava, a very pure devotee of the Lord, when he heard the description at the end of the fifth canto of the different hellish conditions, he was concerned as how to liberate the conditioned souls. So he was astonished there that living entities, even though they hear about suffering, they see it happening to others, it happens to themselves, and still and don't give up following that path called chewing the chewed. Our fathers have followed that path, or grandfathers, so many generations have tried to get enjoyment out of the material world, and they didn't experience lasting happiness. And due to ignorance, then they don't really know what is best for them. So simply what people do is they just think, well, everyone else is doing this, it must be okay. But everyone else is also dissatisfied. Sometimes people are thinking, there must be something wrong with me. Everyone else seems happy, but I'm miserable. But the fact of the matter is that nobody's satisfied. Sometimes people put on a better show, or someone's karma is such that they're enjoying more, so they're more distracted. Still, they're missing the real value of the human form of life. And this statement of Yudhishthira Maharaj, where he says he also meets Yamaraj in the guise of, what was in the guise of again? at the lake.
Oh, the lake.
A crane. And he asked him what was the most astonishing thing, what was the most amazing thing in this world. And you know, if we hadn't known this answer and someone asked us, we might say, oh, if you're attached to Scotland, you might say, oh, Loch Lomond. Or if you're from London, you might say Trafalgar Square. Or if you're from Warrington, the most amazing thing about Warrington is the road out of it, something like that. Or, you know, wherever you're from, you might think, because people are generally attached to their own place of birth, their own country. Or what is the most amazing thing in the world? Oh, it's my beautiful wife, or my lovely husband, or my kids, something like that. But it doesn't remain amazing because, you know, everything passes in due course of time. So anyway, Maharaj Yudhishthira said that the most amazing thing in the material world is that at every moment the souls are flocking to the house of death. Just like sometimes we see the birds migrating, flocks of them going, and you can't count them, so many of them. And he's saying at every moment they're flocking there, but still a foolish person thinks they will not die. We see that every day. Even sometimes we see an insect drowning in a puddle or something like that. And we're just witnessing the spirit soul leaving its body. It's happening all the time. But somehow or other, as Maharaj Yudhishthira said, a foolish person thinks they will not die. So even people know that they're going to die, but they want to blank it out. We don't want to face up to the reality. Sometimes members of the Hare Krishna movement are accused of sticking their head in the sand and not being realistic, not facing up to the responsibilities of life, go and get a proper job. In other words, I'm not happy. Why are you happy doing apparently nothing? Why don't you come and suffer like me? And then Prabhupada to that would say, well, why don't you come and join us? Simply dancing, chanting and feasting. You know, why we have to toil so much? Of course, we have to work. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that one cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. So if we think that we can do that, then it's foolish. And also it's mentioned that one should not depend on too much on another's good graces. So we do have to make our own way in life. That is the simple fact of life. At the same time, Prabhupada says we shouldn't have to work hard like the camels and the asses, the donkeys, where they're working very hard just to maintain a life. So we're doing that. Sometimes we're working very hard, having to earn more than we really need. It's like sometimes we speak with some of our friends in London and we say, you know, how much is your house? How much rent do you pay? And it's some astronomical amount. Or they bought their house and it's some, you know, for a little studio flat in London, you could buy like a 2-3 bedroomed house in Scotland and you think, and have some change to live off. And you say, why don't you just give it up and come and move up here and just join the temple? Or do something very meaningful with your life. But for some reason, other people are attached to these big cities. Although what's it really got to offer? It's a very dangerous place. It's like a jungle. The material world is like that. Padam, padam, yadvi, padam. Danger at every step. We think, oh, I'll become a devotee next week. Or I'll become attentive to my japa tomorrow. I'm just wanting to space out a little bit today. Or maybe I'll listen to class tomorrow. Just for now, I'll just have a nap. But think of new things every day. So, you know, we can hear tomorrow. You know, we've got plenty of time to hear, but we don't know if tomorrow's going to come. And sometimes people say, oh, if you want to really enjoy life to the max, then live life as if it's your last day. But if it really is your last day, then should we not do something more than simply enjoying the senses? Just like we're reading Prabhupada's Lilamrita. Prabhupada's just about to leave his body here, and he's still telling the devotees the same thing, that his body is simply a bag of bones, and we're so concerned with maintaining it, and it's going to let us down in the end anyway. So if you serve someone for some period of time, then you expect some kind of reward, just like in the world of employment. If you're loyal to a company for 30, 40, 50 years, you expect some kind of golden handshake, as they call it, at the end. Sometimes you get a watch and you get a nice round of applause from everybody. And then life goes on and you're out of the picture. And sometimes people are so attached to their place of work that they keep coming back even though they've retired. When I used to work before, there was one old man who'd retired and he came back twice to work, even though he was well beyond the age of retirement, and then he wanted to just work for nothing because that was all he had in life, which was very sad, actually. I didn't know why at the time it was sad, but I knew it was sad that's, I've been thinking, I don't want to work here, I want to get out. And he was thinking, I don't want to be out there, I want to get back in. He'd become so conditioned, practically institutionalized. The material world institutionalizes us, just like we had one friend, Suzanne. She used to organize in Stirling University a program where we used to go and chant and discuss Bhagavad Gita, etc. And she was telling me how some of the people have been in that university for like decades. They do one course after another, and they're afraid to leave the campus. They become institutionalized and they find a comfortable situation. They just limit themselves. So we do that in the material world. We become institutionalized in the material world where we think, Maya's our friend. Although I'm being punished, I know this punishment will end and I'll be able to enjoy again. You just have to ride out the storm. You've got to take the rough with the smooth. And in due course of time, I'll be back on top again. But this is not necessary. As been mentioned here, we don't have to take to karma yoga where we're doing pious activities so we can amass great pious reactions, because then we still have to take birth again. This is why devotees are not interested in the higher planetary systems, because they don't want to just perform some pious activity or exchange their devotional service for some good karma, because that's going to run out. And we know that it's temporary and it's limited. There's different levels of enjoyment in this material world, but even the topmost level of material enjoyment is mentioned in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, that it's nothing. It's the enjoyment experienced by impersonal liberation is considered to be millions of times greater than the highest pleasures in the material world. And furthermore, it's mentioned that the enjoyment experienced by being totally liberated and reconstituted in a original loving relationship with Krishna, having an ever-increasing reciprocal relationship with the Lord, which is described as anandam buddhivardhanam, an ever-increasing ocean of transcendental bliss. So that is unlimitedly greater pleasure than even impersonal liberation. But still, even though we hear about these things, still our mind is attracted to the impermanent. But we have to remind ourselves that we are not a bag of bones. And simply by serving the bag of bones, we're not going to get a golden handshake at the end. We're going to get another body. That's the reward you get is, okay, you served this body, here, have another one. It might be a human, it might not be. We're very fortunate to get a human form of life. And those who have the human form of life, they have such great power. They can do so much good for themselves and for others. And conversely, they can also do so much harm to themselves and to others. In the course of a day, one can accumulate so much karmic reaction to keep you going for many lifetimes. We don't want to go into the details, but just if you consider it, some of the things that people do in the course of a day, it's I add that all up, and it's so many thousands of births they can get simply by a lifetime of sinful activity, simply because either they don't know what is right and what is wrong, or they don't want to know, they don't care. And sometimes this is, unfortunately, this is the devotees, when they see this, either people don't know or they don't want to know. The devotees are saddened by that. Although devotional service is joyful in itself, because devotees become illumined by that knowledge, when they see others suffering and when they see others appear to be enjoying, but they know that what they're doing is going to bring them suffering, with that knowledge we see through the eyes of Shastra Chakshu, then we don't just see, oh, there's somebody having a great time in the pub, having a hamburger, doing this, doing that, and whatever else they might be getting up to. We won't contaminate the atmosphere by describing their activities. And we think, oh, they're enjoying. But the devotee who sees through the eye of knowledge knows that this person doesn't realize that they're suffering. They're paving the way for their own suffering. So this is called para dukkha dukhi. That although the devotees are relishing Krishna consciousness, on the highest platform of devotional service, those who are relishing devotional service, they even feel more compassion. And then there's that famous conversation between Srila Prabhupada and one of his very early disciples, Guru Das. And Guru Das said to Srila Prabhupada that, oh, Srila Prabhupada, sometimes when I see the sufferings of the living entities, sometimes it makes me cry. And Prabhupada replied, only sometimes, Guru Das, only sometimes. So that could indicate that Prabhupada is always seeing through the eyes of compassion, and this is his motivation. This is the Supreme Lord's motivation as well. Krishna descended as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He appeared in the guise of a devotee to show us how to perform devotional service. And out of his great compassion, so Lord Chaitanya, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is known as Mahavadanyaya Avatar. The most merciful, Maha means great, Vadanyaya Avatar, most compassionate, most merciful incarnation of Godhead ever. And because in the age of Kali, which we're living in, is considered like the winter age or the dark age of the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. And later on in the Srimad Bhagavatam, later cantos, I think 11th canto, Kali Yuga is described in more great detail. But still, it is also mentioned that even though Kali Yuga is an ocean of faults, even though Kali Yuga is an ocean of faults, it's a very fallen age, very degraded age, and we see things which were considered taboo some time ago are now considered normal, and that goes on each generation. Of course, for those who don't want to go that way, then it creates a polarization where people then look for answers. It's like, okay, I might have been doing this nonsense, but I don't want to go that far. I don't like the way things are going. Just like when you speak to each generation, you speak to an older person and say, oh, I'm glad I'm not young nowadays. I wouldn't like to be in this world growing up. And then, of course, those who are young now, when they look back, they'll be thinking the same, because the tendency is just like things degenerate. People want, in order to get the pleasure and the kicks that they want out of life, they have to get deeper into the material energy. They have to get into more danger. But fortunately, a lot of people are waking up to this, realizing that this pandemic is actually, it's helped a lot of people open their eyes to think, what am I doing with my life? Unfortunately, some of them are just heading for another different type of material life, but some are actually becoming interested in spiritual subject matter, just like I was speaking with John Thompson last night, our friend and devotee of many years, and he was saying that he's going around the doors selling Bhagavad Gitas, etc. And he's saying so many people are interested nowadays. He said this pandemic has created a great interest in spiritual life. And we're not talking about just interest in religion, they're looking for answers. And this is where Krishna consciousness can really help people, because the answers are there. It's very clearly delineated in the Bhagavad Gita. What is this material world? What is our relationship with it? What is our relationship with that person who is the cause of this material world, Aham Savasya Prabhavo. Krishna is the Lord of all spiritual and material worlds. And so this upcoming story of Ajamil gives us great hope that even though we may have been to the depths of illusion, then when we chant the holy name of the Lord, Krishna is so powerful, Krishna is so pure, that no sinful activity can contaminate him. So when we chant Krishna's name, when we hear about Krishna, discuss Krishna, offer our food to Krishna, taking Krishna prasad, and we become purified, that only if we really stubbornly want to stay in this world are we going to stay here. Krishna is so merciful that we're going back to God, we're going back to Godhead by this activity. Of course, the sincerity of our practice and the determination, Vyavasayatmaka Buddhir Ekeha Kurunandana, that our single-pointed intelligence, Ekeha, then that is really required if one wants to get out of this material world, leave it behind, leave our bag of bones behind once and for all, not jump into another carriage on the train, not jump into another bag of bones, and then mistaking that to be our true self. I mean, the last body we had, we thought that was us, but we don't care about that now. This is the one that we care about. And then in the future, do we want to have another body that we have to be illusioned by thinking this to be us? And this illusion is very hard to overcome, but by correct practice and renunciation, by renouncing that which is binding us to this material world and this bodily concept, and by accepting the path of the descending path, this descending path of knowledge, the knowledge which is coming down from the transcendental platform, the holy name which is coming from the transcendental abode, then we're being connected with that. Just like sometimes because of the pandemic, then we haven't been able to see some friends, and we were recently taking part in a retreat online, and some of these devotees were living in India, some was in Germany and places like that. So we cannot go there, but simply by that via medium we can connect. So this transcendental sound vibration of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, the transcendental literatures, the activity of devotional service is not a mundane activity. Then by this, this is a via medium whereby which we connect with the spiritual world. In Christianity, they have this, the Lord's Prayer, and it says, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." So thy kingdom come, which means that the spiritual world can be here now by what we do here. It's not that we do one thing here, and then at the end of life say, "Oh, sorry about that," and then we get a different lifetime if we just happen to tip the scales. That's just a very vague, naive understanding of how we're going to get out of this material world. But actually, Jivan Mukta Uchite, that we can be liberated even in this lifetime, because there's that saying, being in the world but not of the world. Everybody has heard this saying, but what does it mean? It means that we're living in a material body, we're living in buildings, we use cars, we pay bills like everyone else, but what is our purpose? What is our connection? Our connection is not with simply satisfying our senses and working for others to satisfy their senses and living a life of ignorance, fostering our own ignorance and fortifying that and fortifying others' ignorance by simply bodily relations. Our purpose is the opposite. We're swimming against the tide, and the tide's going one way, the current of the river's going one way, and you're swimming the other way, then it's more of a struggle. You think, oh, it's just easier to swim with the flow. But if it's coming to a waterfall at the end, then you don't want to be swimming that flow. You might just close your eyes and think, oh, it's okay, everything will be okay. I've always been all right. But the danger is there. It's inevitable. The body is not going to last. But what will last is the spirit soul. So the lesson given in this chapter we're going to learn is that Ajamil, he became attracted, even though he was performing some activities of being a Brahmin, still it wasn't enough because it was materially motivated. And because it was materially motivated, he once saw something as a young Brahmin and his mind became contaminated, filled with an unjust desire. And that desire, by his contemplating on it, he was throwing fuel on that fire. So this brings us back to Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, Jayato Vishyam Punsham Sangaste Shupajayate. But by Jayato, meditating on the objects of the senses, contemplating these objects, one develops attachment. So by this association, we develop attachment for the material world. So the idea is when our mind, Krishna says, wherever the mind wanders, bring it back under the higher self. And what is that higher self? Putting our mind and intelligence, absorbing it in Krishna consciousness. And then gradually we get param drisva and nivartati, we get a higher taste. And then we lose, surprisingly, we look back and think, oh, I'm not even interested in the things that I used to be interested in. And we find that very quickly when we take to the path of Krishna consciousness, some things we already don't want to be engaged in any longer. And we find Krishna consciousness gives us strength to give that up. But still we're holding on to some other things which are maybe a bit deeper. But by continuing to practice this Krishna consciousness and keeping ourselves free from the association, asat sangha tyag, to renounce, the asat, the temporary association, then we can do ourselves a great favour. So we say that the highest welfare work is to save yourself first. Before we try to save someone else, if we're concerned about, we should be compassionate for others, but we shouldn't be acting on a false level of such compassion that we want to save the whole world and we neglect ourselves. Sometimes we may do that. We see that everyone's suffering, let me just neglect myself to go and save them. But then what happens is you may not save them and you may lose yourself. Just like that story is given of the Brahmin who lost his caste and still went hungry. Everybody knows that story. The Brahmin who lost his caste and still went hungry. Anybody not know it? You don't know? Yeah, so basically in the caste system, we have the 4 orders of life, 4 social orders, Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya and Brahmin. And Brahmin is considered to be the priestly class, intelligent class. And then those who are not within that caste, who are considered outcasts by their perception anyway, then they don't accept males in the homes of those, otherwise it's considered, it's a kind of superstitious thing really. They consider that they'll lose their caste. Just like hundreds of years ago, there was a rumour spread that if someone who's an outcast sprinkles water on the head of a Brahmin, then they lose their caste. So this was just some propaganda to break down the Varnashram system, of course. But anyway, this Brahmin, he was very hungry. He was travelling somewhere, and he called on this house and he says, I'm very hungry, can you feed me? And it was a Muslim family, and they invited him in to the house and he says, yeah, certainly. And they're very pious people, and to invite a stranger into your house is not everybody would do that. So they're very pious people. And but they were quite poor also. Even though they were poor, they still shared their meal with a stranger, which is a very compassionate thing to do. So they didn't have too much to eat, but they shared it anyway. So the meal was finished, and the Brahmin said, hey, actually, I'm still a bit hungry. Is there anything left? And he says, no, I'm sorry, that's all. So he was still hungry. And he says, oh, by the way, what caste are you? He says, oh, we're not caste, we're Muslim. And then by eating in the house of a Muslim, the consideration was that you would lose your caste. So he went hungry still, and he lost his caste. So we have to be careful to balance Krishna consciousness with looking after ourselves, just like one devotee was telling me recently, that we have to, self-love doesn't mean to say vanity. We have to give ourselves some self-love, self-compassion. We have to take care of ourselves. Not that we have to punish ourselves. This atonement thing is not, it's not recommended. This, perhaps I hope so you can remember what's spoken about in the Nectar of Instruction regarding atonement. Rupa Goswami says something about that, doesn't he?
Like an elephant bathing and after he's cleansed himself, and because he still has the tendency to go into self-activity, just cover himself in dust, so he just goes straight back to square one.
Exactly. So this is called Hati Snan or Hasti Snan.
So snan means bath, and hati or hasti means elephant. So when the elephant takes a bath, it takes great care to clean itself. It goes in there and it submerges itself, and it uses its trunk to wash itself, and they wash each other, etc. And what they do, as soon as they come out, they roll in the dirt again, because they feel more comfortable with the dirt on them. So this is what happens, this so-called atonement. It means cleansing yourself, but then immediately, because we have that desire, we feel comfortable in that contaminated atmosphere of the material world, then immediately we accept something of that material world which contaminates us again. So therefore, atonement isn't actually good enough. We have to uproot that misconception and uproot that desire to enjoy separately from the cause of all causes. And that is simply done by, instead of trying to please ourselves separately from Krishna, we please Krishna directly by devotional service, and automatically we become pleased. And the age-old example is given that we water the root of the tree, and all parts of the tree become nourished. And we just have to believe that and practice it. And when we practice it, then it's no longer a belief, it's an experience. The fact that people can give up some things which are standard enjoyments of the material world and be happy, be healthy, and be satisfied, then it proves that there is a higher taste. So this Bhakti Yoga is considered Yoginam apisa vesham madgatenan taratmana shravan bhajate yo mam samyukta tamo mataha. So Krishna explains different processes of yoga and ways of elevating one's consciousness. And he says, and of all yogis, the one who always abides in me, worship me in transcendental loving faith, then he is the highest of all and the most intimately united with me. So we can take Krishna's word for it, or we can try everything else out and still remain in the material world. But Bhakti Yoga replaces material desire. Material desire is never satisfied, as much as the fire never goes out by continuing to put fat or fuel on it. So simultaneously we stop fueling the fire, that fire, and we fuel another fire, the fire of devotion. So it's mentioned here that if one follows this path of liberation, one can gradually progress to Brahmaloka, and then at the end of that, which is a very, very long time, one can go back home to Godhead. It's considered that all the inhabitants of Brahmaloka at the end of the cosmic manifestation, they go back to Godhead. But that's a long time. You could say, oh, it's nothing in eternity, but it's why stall it? And then Prabhupada says here, though, that unless one is a pure devotee who does not care about going to the high planetary systems, then one immediately returns home back to Godhead by executing the devotional service. Tyaktva deham punar janma naiti. Naiti means that he does not take birth again in the material world. So when the devotees are speaking like this, Maharaj Parikshit, he's very eager to hear from Shukadev Goswami, because he's been given a curse to die in 7 days, and he knows that curse will come true, and it did. And he wasn't He wasn't afraid. He wasn't panicking. He took it as a great blessing. He wasn't lamenting. He said it was a great blessing, and I can't remember if it was a conversation that took place, but sometimes it's mentioned that, what would you do if you were given 7 days to live? So Maharaj Parikshit's mood was, at least I know I'll have 7 days, whereas everybody else, it could be today, it could be tomorrow. I know I've got 7 days, so then I can just give up everything. He gave up sleeping, eating. He just focused on hearing because he wanted to get completely fixed in samadhi, complete absorption of Krishna, so that at the end of that 7 days, and as it was, completely perfect, scheduled, at the end, he went back to Godhead. So it's mentioned that this Bhakti Yoga is a culmination of all the other yoga processes. Now, certainly one can get physical benefits, a certain amount of psychological, spiritual benefits from the other types of yoga, but it's more troublesome, it takes a long time, and it's easier to fall down from. Prabhupada says that Bhakti Yoga, however, is so powerful that it does not depend on karma or jnana. It doesn't depend on pious activity or accumulated knowledge. It's so powerful that even an impious man with no assets, or an illiterate man with no assets in karma jnana yoga, can undoubtedly be elevated to the spiritual world if he simply adheres to Bhakti Yoga. So therefore, this is the most direct, powerful method. And sometimes people think it's so easy that it just must be sentimentality. We can't believe it. Prabhupada said that it's so easy you could miss it. And even in Lord Chaitanya's times, people were criticizing him, thinking, no, they're just sentimentalists chanting Hare Krishna. Why don't they study the Vedas? Why don't they perform austerities? But Lord Chaitanya was showing you this is the Yuga Dharma. This is not the age for trying to accumulate pious activities or trying to study the Vedas to achieve some type of liberation. This is Kali Yuga, where the Yuga Dharma is Harinam Sankirtan. And this Harinam Sankirtan is directly a gift from the spiritual world. Golokera Prema Dan. Dana means donation or gift. It's a gift from the Goloka Vrindavan, Golokera Prema Dan, Harinam Sankirtan. This chanting of the holy name is directly coming from the spiritual world. And we connect with that, and we connect with the spiritual world. It's as simple as that. And all we have to do is just keep on trying to focus on that and focus all our activities to serve that purpose. Keep ourselves connected and try to connect as many as we can in this life. And then by doing that also we get special mercy of the Lord. The interesting thing about spiritual life is the more you give, the more you get. So the more you give into it, the more you get from it. And also the more you give that mercy to others, the more mercy comes your way. Okay, we'll just stop there. Anyone get any questions or comments, please?
It's an interesting point about, the point that you brought up about self. Says, and I can online, it's not self-absorption. Of course, it can be, but if it's done in the right way, then I think the more you become with the material or spiritually qualified, then the more you're able to give to others. So if you're constantly growing, then you can help people around you to also grow. So it's not just like a necessity, but almost like a responsibility to continue growing so we can help others to grow.
It's a fact, actually.
And taking the biggest responsibilities, such as the spiritual masters, then they have such a responsibility of care to other people, not to let them down.
You were mentioning in the class that some people, that the people don't realize that they're suffering. And it's not the same also that a devotee, he may not realize he's enjoying, although he's...
Yeah. Sometimes it's
like the old saying is, you don't know a good thing till it's gone. And I remember actually I talked to you also saying that when you look at somebody who's left Krishna consciousness, they never look happier for it. Sometimes we might be a bit not so happy because we know it's the right thing to do to come to Krishna consciousness, but we're still attached, so maybe there's a bit of a misery there because we're still attached to doing things which we know we shouldn't really be doing, and we're refraining from doing that. So that may be there to some degree, but if we wouldn't do it, it's even going to be worse. And there was one devotee who left Krishna consciousness, and he was trying to enjoy going to the pub and nightclubs and all that, but he couldn't forget Krishna. This means Krishna wasn't forgetting him. Krishna was always in his mind. And then he got to the point where he was so desperate, he was praying to Krishna that he could forget him. But by praying to Krishna, he was remembering him more. And then he came back to the temple. So an example of, we might try to forget Krishna. They say that becoming a devotee is like joining the mafia. And the mafia, you can't leave because you know too much. So similarly in Krishna consciousness, you can't leave. You might physically remove yourself from it, but you can't really stick your head in the sand again. And they also say that if a devotee tries to enjoy the material world again, they suffer twice as much because of suffering and knowledge. You know, for example, someone that's in ignorance, they don't really know what the cause of the suffering is, or the root cause of the suffering, not just the external cause, not just like, oh, my toe's sore because I banged it on the door. No, the root cause is the karmic reaction. For someone who doesn't know that, they say there's only two types of people can be happy in the material world. One who's a liberated soul and one who is ignorance, ignorant and fool. One who's completely in ignorance. But once you start to wake up to the fact that, I'm not this body, there's a world beyond this, I'm frustrated, I was never really happy, I was searching all the time, I didn't quite realise it, and now I can see it, then we can't go back to it. So that might be a little difficult to begin with, but once we accept that fact, then we realise actually this is a joyful thing. Now we're getting out of here. Just like perhaps maybe someone who's an addict, alcohol or drugs or something, they may go to rehab and it may be difficult to begin with. They know they have to do it because their life is going to be a disaster if they don't give it up. And there may be some struggle, but once they went through it, then they're glad they did. They're free from it. Any type of connection or addiction or attachment. I remember I used to smoke, and when I was going through the pain of giving it up, I thought, I'm not going to go through this again, so therefore I'm never smoking again, because it was interesting. My friend Dasa, before we were devotees, I told him, I'm giving up smoking again. He says, what do you mean again? He says, you can only give it up once, or you haven't given it up. And I thought, that's what I need to hear. We used to be quite straightforward with each other. I'm thinking of becoming a vegetarian. Are you just thinking about it? You're going to do it? So yes, he said, so it means you haven't given up if you're thinking of doing it again. He says, giving it up means giving it up. And I thought, that's good. So then I thought, every time I was tempted, I thought, no, I've given it up. And I went through it. So anyone who's tried to give up that, I mean, maybe not anyone, but a lot of people have tried to give that up, or any other thing they tried to give up. The pain you go through of getting free from it, you don't want to have to go through that again. Just stay free from it. So any type of attachment we give up, which we see is causing us some misery. And Krishna says that in the Bhagavad Gita, an intelligent person doesn't like to suffer. He knows what is the cause of the sufferings, and he gives up those things. So that is real intelligence, not that we have 40 PhDs and with the CEO of a global company, but still they're just attached. They're so attached they don't know what to do with their millions and billions, and they suddenly, because they get so much money than everyone else, they think that they have a right to tell everybody, what their future is. But our future is we're getting out of this material world, and these people have got no say in the matter. There's nothing material, there's no material impediment to this Krishna consciousness movement, and there's no material impediment to our own personal Krishna consciousness unless we allow it. So sometimes the devotee is actually enjoying more than they realize. But we don't want to really have to go back to our old ways to see how much we'd become free from it. It's like when you're climbing a ladder step by step, you're just going up in small increments, but then you look down, you realise how far you've come up. Sometimes we don't realise how far we've came until we look back and think, oh, I'm not doing that any longer. I'm not bothered by this. I'm maybe still bothered by some things, but not like I was before. I was completely chained to it. Okay, is that all right?
Couple of online comments by said, Hare Krishna, all you say resonates deeply, even without me having bad experience, like primal knowledge or something.
Yes.
Next,
Yeah.
one more comment. It's like we cannot unlearn something which is truth.
We can't what?
We cannot unlearn something
Unlearn.
which is truth. Everything else seems easily forgettable.
And that is, thanks, Eamon, Hare Krishna. Thanks for your comments. That's a fact because the living entity is full of knowledge already. Our knowledge has become covered. So when we take to Krishna consciousness, the Krishna consciousness process is actually simply removing the coverings of the lower modes of material nature. And Krishna explains that in Bhagavad Gita, that when we come to this platform of transcendental knowledge, we will become indifferent to all that has been seen, all that has been heard. It has no bearing. And we actually will realize that the soul was never contaminated. And this is the problem with atonement. We think we're contaminated and we have to clean ourselves up. But actually, the soul is never contaminated. So as we start to identify with our true self, then knowledge, bliss, and eternality, we become aware of these things. And we become acutely aware of the opposite of this material world, Nirananda, which means it's not blissful. Achit is not eternal. And Asat is temporary. And this is also explained in Bhagavad Gita that the great sages, they have determined that which is eternal to be true, and that which is temporary to be illusion. So, of course, just one last thing. Illusion doesn't mean to say it doesn't exist, but it means it's temporary. It's not a permanent thing. The material world does exist. It's not just a dream. It's like a dream, but it's actually it's a temporary reality. But as we see in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the description of the nature of the soul cannot be destroyed by anything. No material element can destroy it because the soul is actually beyond all these material elements, both gross and subtle, and nothing can harm the soul. Okay, so we'll just stop there because I went on a little bit. Okay, thanks, Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Iskon Guruvanda ki, Shri Kodantama Prashant ki, Tagore Premanande, Gaura Bhaktavrinda ki.